As you heard, I'm grateful to be in Washington, D.C. at the National Association of Secretaries of State Conference, where a bipartisan collection of election officials from all across the country are meeting to share best practices and make sure our elections are secure, safe, and accessible. With external threats to our freedoms, our values, it's really encouraging to see election officials showing up, working hard to protect voters and the sanctity and security of our elections. On the topic of voter protection and election security, I wanted to share the results of an investigation conducted by the Michigan Bureau of Elections into Macomb County Clerk Anthony Forlini's recent allegations. Now, in a press conference on January 12th, Clerk Forlini claimed that he had found 15 people who, between September of 2025 and January in 2026, recused themselves from jury duty because they were not United States citizens, and that they were also registered to vote in Michigan. Now, let me be clear, only U.S. citizens can vote in Michigan's elections, while national and state reviews prove again and again that it is very rare. I take any reports of illegal voting in our state very seriously. Following these accusations, the Michigan Bureau of Elections reviewed these 15 records, compared them in our CARS driver database and to the federal SAVE system. What we found was that only 3 of the 15 people referred had any voting history at all, and 1 was an American citizen who had legally cast their ballot. 1 we are still investigating, and the 3rd last voted in 2018, and we at the Bureau of Elections in the state of Michigan canceled their registration in 2022. Our major concern in these findings is that at least 1 eligible Michigan voter may now be under criminal investigation for voting. In addition, at least 2 of the people who did not vote have also been verified to be United States citizens. Their voter registrations are now in jeopardy of being canceled without notice and having done nothing wrong. I've long said we need to conduct these reviews thoroughly and carefully, and this is why. Because these accusations have real consequences for real people. When we review our voter lists, it is not uncommon to find eligible American voters improperly labeled as non-citizens, whether by clerical error, change of citizenship status, or otherwise. We update our lists accordingly so that eligible citizens aren't wrongfully investigated, removed from voter rolls, or stopped from voting. In my administration as Secretary of State, we have removed more than 1.1 million out-of-date registrations from our voter rolls that we have done legally and carefully to ensure that every eligible citizen is able to vote. But I want to talk for a minute about what these accusations that proved false are really about. It's not election security. The clerk told media outlets that he was working with law enforcement on this issue and met with officials from the Trump Justice Department about his findings. That's the same Justice Department that is suing Michigan and 23 states at the president's behest in an attempt to force us to turn over private information, private personal information of millions of Michigan residents through full unredacted voter rolls. That same Justice Department will not tell states why they want this information, this private information of Michiganders. They won't tell us what they're going to use it for, or even if they will store it safely. That same Justice Department demanded, after its federal agents terrorized, kidnapped, and shot civilians in broad daylight, that Minnesotans turn over their voter rolls to, in their words, restore law and order. They are using the power of the federal government to intimidate and threaten states into changing our safe and secure election procedures. Why? To meet the president's personal and political agenda and to silence the voices of millions of eligible American citizens. The truth is, this administration wants access to Michigan's and other states' voter rolls so that they can intimidate us and others, so they can make us afraid to vote. So this is our message to the administration. I will not stop fighting for our rights and for our neighbors. We will not stop fighting against every effort and lie that attempts to silence the voices and votes of the American people. And Mr. President, we ask you to work to ensure that if you truly care about election security, that you support election officials on the ground who are working to tackle real threats to our elections. Foreign interference, weaponized lies, and disinformation that threatens the lives of Republican and Democratic and independent election administrators around our states, and the severe cuts your administration has made to cybersecurity support for our states. I will always work with anyone who is willing to defend our democracy, and I look forward to continuing to do that based on facts, truth, and what our citizens really need to have rightly placed faith in our elections. Now I'm going to turn it over to David Becker, who works on these issues nationwide, and we'll talk more about what you're seeing and what he's seeing on other states. David, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you, Secretary Benson. It's a pleasure to be here with you today talking about these important issues which resonate not just in Michigan, but nationwide. I know many of you, but for those of you that don't know me, I am someone who's worked in the election space for nearly 30 years now. I worked for many years in the Department of Justice's voting section under 3 attorneys general, 2 of them Republican, 1 of them Democratic. And since 2016, I founded the nonpartisan nonprofit Center for Election Innovation and Research. We're based in Washington, D.C. And we work with election officials all over the country and across the political spectrum to support their work, ensuring elections that are accessible and secure for all. And those election officials, if you've heard me speak before, have done just a remarkable job, from secretaries of state like Secretary Benson all the way down to local election officials and poll workers who, despite disinformation and even a global pandemic, have done a remarkable job over these last 10 years that my organization's been in existence. First, I work all over the country, and I talk to election officials all over the country. I speak at conferences. I'm here at the National Association of Secretaries of State meeting. I was speaking to election officials in Texas and Colorado earlier this month, and I'm going to be in Florida and Arizona next month. And one of the things that I've learned in talking with election officials across the country, regardless of partisanship, is there's not a single election official out there that I've ever spoken to that wants a non-citizen on their voter list. But there is also not a single election official that I've ever spoken to out there who wants to accidentally or intentionally remove an eligible voter from the voting list because they made a mistake. And that is one of the things I've seen that has led to the high quality of our voter lists across the country. While there have been politicians that have pushed this issue of alleged non-citizen voting, non-citizen registration, and widespread voter fraud, we actually have a very good sense of the facts around this. And the facts are that even according to those who push some of these false narratives, the existence of non-citizen registration and voting is extraordinarily rare. Again, thanks to the professionalism of election officials all over the country at the state and local level. For instance, it was recently reported that the Department of Homeland Security did an analysis of about 49 million voter records, states that had voluntarily shared information with the Department of Homeland Security. This is the Trump administration Department of Homeland Security, and largely states that are aligned with President Trump. And the results of that were that less than 0.02% were even identified as possible non-citizens. And then when you dig into that data even further, you find that many of those are false positives. There was recently an assessment of the Texas voter file. It was reported in NPR, and my organization did a complete analysis of some of this data. And after Texas sent their 18 million voter records to the Department of Homeland Security, only about 2,700 were returned as possible non-citizens. The state then sent those to each county to review, and one county, Denton County, which is north of Dallas in Texas, found that 15 of the 89 they had been sent were actual documented citizens. 14 of them did exactly what they were supposed to do. They got a license even though they were non-citizens. They truthfully said they were non-citizens, and the state, through an administrative error, registered them anyway. Those individuals were victims. They did exactly what they were supposed to do, and the state let them down in that case. That's 29 just in a few weeks identified as false positives from the 89 that were sent to that county. That's an error rate of around 33%. And we estimate that that error rate is likely much higher once further investigation is completed. So we know the rate of non-citizen registration, and particularly non-citizen voting, is very low. And what Secretary Benson and her team have found from the Macomb County analysis tracks that exactly. And to their great credit, election officials all over the country, Democrats and Republicans, are doing a very good job of identifying that and preventing that from occurring. I think with that, I'll let it go, and I think we'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, let's start with Andrew Meiniger.
Hi, thank you, Hank. Thank you for taking my question. My question is the one that you are suspicious of, or that did come out. Did this come up in any of the previous investigations that the Secretary of State's done, where you have found the non-citizen?
What we found for certain is clear evidence that some of the people on Clerk Forlini's lists are US citizens who cast ballots legally. And the reason I'm sounding this alarm today is because we have proof that the warnings we've been given that approaching this issue with a sledgehammer and not a scalpel can lead to the disenfranchisement of eligible voters. Reckless accusations without careful investigations put American citizens under the threat of arrest and criminal inquiry, even though they have done nothing wrong. We have evidence that a single ineligible voter on the list of 15 people has voting history. The last election they voted in was 2018 under my predecessor, the previous Secretary of State. During my tenure, we actually removed that person from the voter rolls through our careful work to ensure we are every day routinely working with local clerks to update and improve the accuracy of our voter rolls.
My question was that if this came up in one of the previous investigations that you have already put out, I know in 2022, after the election, was this one individual part of a previous investigation?
Yeah, well, our policy is to refer confirmed incidents of illegal voting to the Attorney General in all circumstances for criminal investigation. In this case, this was so long ago, this was before my tenure. So we're currently working to review the statute of limitations to determine our legal options. But certainly we work to, within the boundaries and confines of the law, ensure that anyone is found violating the law or voting illegally, that they are referred to the Attorney General for criminal investigation.
Thank you.
Okay, next
I
we've
should
got,
say,
oh, go ahead.
I should say anyone who is found with credible evidence.
Okay, next we've got Isabella with AP.
Okay, good morning. Secretary, thank you so much for having this. Governor Whitmer recently said in an interview that Michigan is preparing for the Trump administration to possibly disrupt voting in the elections of 2026 and 2028. Is your office involved in these tabletop exercises she mentioned, and what does that look like?
Yes, our office has been leading several scenario planning efforts on the state and local level, working with law enforcement, first responders, and local clerks, as well as other local officials, to prepare for any potential disruptions of our election of any type, whether it comes from the White House or any type of other entity. We've been doing this throughout my administration in 2020 and 2022, and again in 2024. It's one of the reasons we can confidently say that while we always hope for the best, we plan for every contingency. And we're going to continue to work with all parties at the state and local level to ensure we're prepared for everything. And it really underscores also not just our preparation for 26 and 28 and beyond, but how much stronger the fabric of the election administration community has become over these last several cycles, as we work together with local law enforcement, with first responders, to be prepared to mitigate any potential disruptions and certainly deter them from happening in the first place. And above all, be positioned to give the citizens of Michigan the confidence and clarity they need that when they vote, they will be safe, their voice will be heard, and their vote will be counted.
Thank you.
Next, we've got Beth LeBlanc, Detroit News.
Hi, Beth.
Hey, thanks for taking these questions. So I might have missed something in Clerk Forlini's presentation, but my impression of how he identified these individuals was that they were people who came forward during when they were selected for jury duty and said, "Hey, I'm a non-citizen. I shouldn't be selected for jury duty." So I'm wondering, like, if you guys are aware of where that breakdown was, like, is it that they lied about jury duty, or did he misidentify them in the voter rolls? Or I, I'm wondering if you guys know how that happened.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to ask those questions to Clerk Forlini. What we did was ask for the evidence of any type of wrongdoing. And from what he gave to us, these are our findings. I also know that responsible election officials don't hold press conferences before they've actually verified anything. And we don't meet with federal officials that are pushing conspiracy theories around voting before we've actually checked the facts. Our job as election officials is to follow the facts and protect voters. And I'm going to also turn it over to David Becker, who'd like to add something.
Hi, good morning again. So we have heard these claims related to jury questionnaires for about 2 decades. This is not a new thing, but what we've seen consistently is that jury questionnaires are a really bad source of matching to voter files for a variety of reasons. First, it's really hard to take a name from a jury questionnaire and match it to a voter file and be absolutely certain you're talking about the same individual, because the data on a jury questionnaire doesn't often match what might be in the voter file. For instance, a driver's license number or social security number might not be on that. So you're going to get a lot of false positives. But what we have seen regularly, and this is relevant to your question, is that many of the individuals who have been flagged, often wrongly, are individuals who, if they're committing any fraud at all, have lied on their jury questionnaire to get out of jury duty, rather than having lied under penalty of perjury on a voter registration form, which carries with it tremendous consequences. It's a felony in both at the federal and state level. It's something that very, very rarely happens. So this is more often, if anything, someone who is kind of spinning the truth to get out of jury duty. All you have to do is watch a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode to see how often that might happen. But rarely is it an intentional fraud on the voter list.
I
Thank
had
you,
one. I had
Oh.
one follow-up question, Secretary. Do you
Together.
tally of how many individuals you've removed from the voting list, perhaps in your tenure and in recent years, who are non-citizens?
Well, my office and local clerks are consistently and continuously doing periodic reviews of our voter rolls. And we have cleaned up more than 1.1 million voter registrations during my tenure. We also have a website at michigan.gov/vote that Angela and our team will get to you, that goes through that process in further detail. And what we have found through that work has only reinforced the reality that non-citizen voting is extremely rare. In a review conducted of the 2024 presidential election in Michigan, we found that of the over 5.7 million votes that were cast, less than 1%, which was actually 0.00028%, appeared to be from ineligible voters. And Michigan is the 10th largest state in the country, but we have removed the 6th largest total number of registrations based on ineligibility in the country. And so we continue to do that work on a regular basis. And that's why we've also set up a website for anyone to be able to track that. And Angela can follow up with additional details on that.
And if I may, I just to put this in a national context, I've worked on voter lists for 20 years now with states across the country. And I can tell you that Michigan is a standard bearer for clean voter lists. By every measure, there are 3 major things we look for when we're looking for what states have in terms of clean voter lists, in addition to the things Secretary Benson just mentioned. 1, automatic voter registration, and integration of the data between the voter lists and the motor vehicles files. Those 2 things are very important. Michigan has a structural advantage there because the motor vehicles department is under the Secretary of State, as is the elections department that only exists in one other state, the state of Maine. But in addition, this Secretary of State's office has done a particularly good job of ensuring the integrity and integration of that data between those two agencies. So when someone has a life event and they report it to motor vehicles, that gets reported to elections to keep those voter lists up to date. And then finally, what Michigan does, along with half the states in the United States, is they're a member of the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC, which allows them to compare data with other states and clean up voter lists, voter records, when someone has moved out of Michigan into another state. They are the first to hear that, along with the other states that are in ERIC. So they have remarkably high quality data in their voter lists. There are a handful of states that check all of those boxes. Not all of them are blue, not all of them are red. One of the other best states is the state of Georgia, run by Republicans. The state of Michigan, currently run by Democrats. Both have extraordinarily clean lists at the very peak of the nation and a standard bearer for the entire nation.
Okay, next we've got Haley Harding with VoteBeat.
Hi, thank you. I am wondering, obviously we saw that the FBI conducted a search in Fulton County, Georgia yesterday, allegedly connected to the 2020 election. And I am wondering, Secretary, what is your response to seeing that news? And what, if anything, is Michigan, in so much as you can prepare for something like that, telling its clerks, doing to prepare for such a thing if it were to happen in Michigan as well?
Yeah, so let me be abundantly clear here. What happened in Fulton County was a continuation of unproven, time and time again, unproven conspiracy theories about an election that the president lost. The 2020 election was safe, secure, and the results were an accurate reflection of the will of the people. If there was anything other than that to say about that election with truth, we would have found evidence of that by now, because in Georgia, as Secretary Brad Raffensperger reiterated yesterday, they did a full hand recount of every paper ballot in that state. In Michigan, we, after the 2020 election, had over 250 local and statewide audits done to reaffirm the procedures and results of that election, and we posted the results of those audits online. Transparency is our friend, and we welcome any questions that people have about past elections, but we do not welcome the conspiracy theory driven, verifiably, factually untrue efforts to use the federal government to intimidate, and threaten local election officials or interfere in any way with our elections, based not on evidence, but based on a political and partisan agenda. The bottom line to me is that the 2020 election will and continue to be seen as a secure and valid and accurate election to anyone who looks at the actual facts and data. And we will refer anyone who continues to ask those questions to that data, and also continue our work to ensure the next elections continue fairly, securely, freely, and without the interference of anyone who would try to disrupt our processes, their security, and the safety of our voters.
Thank you.
We've got time for one more question. Lily with Gongwer.
Thanks, guys. And thanks, Secretary. So just kind of, I want to piggyback off of Haley's question. So we saw photos from that Fulton County raid of Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard on scene there, and that suggests, you know, some sort of foreign intel nexus happening. And that, you know, coupled with, like you mentioned, the request for voter rolls in Minnesota, and what we've seen, you know, the fact that Clerk Forlini was in conversation with Trump administration officials regarding the idea of non-citizen voting here. I'm intrigued if you see a pattern of these things popping up around the country that suggest, you know, any sort of effort, concerted or not, to suggest that there was foreign interference in the last election, whether you know, for or against President Trump, and if that's going to be used as some sort of, I guess, excuse to come into the states in 2026. And, you know, if so, is that something that the states have really anything they can do to prevent any legal recourse to hit back at the federal government in that scenario?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, if the federal government was truly focused and concerned about protecting our elections from foreign interference, they would not have defunded and dismantled the very effective federal protections that we built and have had in place in 2020 and had in place in 2024, and that have since been dismantled under the Trump administration. And there have been recent reports going into detail about that defunding and dismantling of those protections. We also worked and tried to hire additional individuals in Michigan who had lost their jobs through that dismantling at the federal level, and the funding for that was cut by the state legislature. So here in Michigan. So all that to say is, yes, I am deeply concerned about the use of misinformation around the security of our elections being used as potentially an effort to not just sow seeds of doubt about the security of our elections, but also potentially try to interfere with our elections in the future. And this is precisely why state secretaries of state, local clerks, and other state officials are so crucial in this moment, because we are the guardrails. We are the ones that have tools in our toolbox legally and also administratively to continue to support and protect the local efforts to run elections in our state. As long as I'm serving in the state of Michigan, I will wake up every day willing to stand up to anyone, no matter how powerful, no matter how many threats they throw my way, who would try to interfere with the voices and votes of the people of Michigan, no matter where they live or who they vote for. That's my oath. That's my commitment. And in this moment, we need every Secretary of State and election official in this country to be aligned with that goal, given what we saw unfold in Fulton County, given what we've seen in an effort to dismantle our efforts to protect our elections from foreign interference. We'll continue to do that work. And I have faith that if we do it together as an election administration community of officials dedicated to doing our job and following the law, that we will prevail just as we've prevailed at every turn of this in 2020 and in 22 and in 2024. But that certainly is the work that is unfolding in the months ahead, and is going to require us to continue to redouble our efforts to scenario plan and prepare for anything to occur to try to dismantle our democracy, interfere with our elections, or otherwise try to silence the will of the American voters.
Can you talk a little bit about the tools in the toolbox? You mentioned there are legal and administrative options. Are there, and maybe this is a question better answered offline or something you guys can follow up with me on, but like what are the legal or administrative options if the federal government does say, you know, we're coming to Michigan and we want to take over your elections?
Yeah, there are several legal options that we can go into in more granular detail that we've scenario planned around in partnership with attorneys and others who have been looking for. Again, this isn't new. The threats aren't new. We've been working in this space since prior to the 2020 election. So there are laws in place. In fact, additional laws in Michigan that protect against interference, enable us to ensure the certification of valid elections and the like. There are other administrative things we can do to support clerks and ensure they have protections. You have to, of course, match the protection to the specific problem. But overall, that's what the scenario planning exercises are for as well, to bring people together, all of whom on both sides of the aisle are committed to following the law and protecting our elections, to work through all the various ways in which interference could occur and develop a plan to mitigate or deter across the board. What I will add, however, is what we've seen this typically also transform into as we get closer to elections is not necessarily an effort to physically interfere with our elections, although everything is on the table and we have to prepare for everything. A lot of the work is about just getting people to be either confused about how to vote or to lose faith that the process works and that their voice will matter. And it's important to see all of these attacks in that light as well. This is not just actual attacks on trying to dismantle the processes themselves. There's an overarching effort as well to dismantle people's faith in our voting process and in our elections. And that's why, in addition to the scenario planning, in addition to our commitment to use every legal and administrative tool in our toolbox to protect our elections, we also are working with faith leaders and community leaders and business leaders and sports leaders continuously to ensure every citizen can have rightly placed faith in the elections process, because that faith is as critical to protect as the security of our elections themselves.